The Special Forces groups are where America's Green Berets get to work. 5th Special Forces Group has been involved in every conflict, known and unknown, across the Middle East since inception. Doing hard things isn't considered an ask, it's the standard.
5th Group's job is to go forward and win our nation's battles, whatever that may be.
I'm just proud to be here. I'm proud to be part of this organization and have the history that we have.
Colonel Gabe Szody and Command Sergeant Major Travis Esterby define what combat power means to Special Forces and how the Army warfighting functions are applied across operational detachments. Watch, listen, or read our cold spring morning conversation from Gabriel Field as we honored 5th Group's sacrifice and contributions to America's national security.
Colonel Szody, Sergeant Major Esterby, welcome to the Jedburgh podcast.
Thanks, Fran. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Well, and thanks to the whole staff from 5th Group. Everybody's been absolutely amazing and welcomed us in here. We're on Gabriel Field, so not everybody has their own parade field, but you got one here.
Yeah, we're a little unique here at 5th Group, but Gabriel Field has a history behind it. If you talk to anybody at 5th Group, what they're going to tell you is that this field right here is really the center of gravity in terms of the 5th Group footprint. And while we do a lot of changes, command responsibilities out here, what this really is our memorial field. And if you look around the field, there's a number of trees, 69 in total, 30 pavers, that commemorate our fallen since the group moved here in 1988. And so this is a very special place for the group. Like I said, it's our center of gravity. I think it's unique to this organization.
And 25 Medal of Honor recipients.
25 Medal of Honor recipients. More Medal of Honor recipients than any other 06 headquarters. Some divisions don't have as many. And that feeds into the culture of the unit. And if you think about when the unit was created, 1961, and then less than a year later, the group headquarters goes to Vietnam, and it's there for several years. That breeds a certain kind of culture that carries on to today.
The Jedburgh podcast is brought to you by University of Health and Performance. We're going to talk about it.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to tell you, as you know, because as big fans of the Jedburgh podcast,
Huge.
you have seen over the last year or so, we have focused a lot of our conversations really at the strategic level. And we've been fortunate enough to have on all the senior leadership from Special Operations Command. We've had General Braga, we've had General Ferguson, we had Sergeant Major Dave Waldo, we had Chief Mosqueda, we had Sergeant Major of the Army Weimer on. And we were able to really get a glimpse into where are we as an organization of Army Special Operations, where's the Army writ large going, and how are we making this transition from 20 years plus of the global war on terror to what the new battlefield is. But all those conversations have been at the strategic level, which is important to understand. But that's not where the rubber meets the road. Where the rubber meets the road is at the tactical level, and that's at our Special Forces group. So it's an honor to be here, having spent many years with you.
Yeah.
It's awesome now to be on this side and be able to sit down, watch you progress, and take command of a group is awesome to see. So congratulations.
It's the accidental career, man.
Well, because I do remember when there was a young Major Szody walking through the hallways. But it's awesome to see that and to get your perspective on how you're taking all of those strategic initiatives and applying that tactical level. That's what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to do it through the lens of the warfighting functions. You guys know I like doctrine. Anyone who watches the show knows I do. The Army's warfighting functions are, by definition, the physical means that tactical commanders use to execute operations and accomplish missions assigned by superior tactical and operational level commanders. In other words, it's our combat power, and it's defined by command and control, movement and maneuver, sustainment, protection, fires, and intelligence. And that's how we're going to talk about the tactical.
Sounds good.
We're going to start with command and control. We're going to talk about 5th Group. We're going to talk about what it means to lead this organization, command and control, or C2. It's about leadership. How do you, as a leader, inspire and empower others to do something they may not otherwise do, not because you told them, but because they want to? What's the mission of 5th Special Forces Group?
So the mission of 5th Special Forces Group is to win our assigned task. And right now, we have a battalion deployed at any given time. And we've had one deployed, or elements deployed, since 2001 to CENTCOM. 5th Group's job is to go forward and win our nation's battles, whatever that may be. Okay. And we've been doing it for a long time. I got a trick question for you.
I love that.
Okay. Can you name the combat operations that 5th Group's been involved in since 1990?
Can I pick D, all of the above?
You got it. So 5th Group has been involved in every combat operation that the U.S. has been involved in since 1990, and obviously Vietnam as well. But that's bred into the organization. That's part of the culture and the DNA of this unit. I really don't need to inspire too many people. I think the culture does that by itself. But the mission of the group is to accomplish whatever task we are given by our higher headquarters, our operational headquarters. And right now, that task is firmly rooted in the Middle East and the Levant, and really the rest of the Central Command's area of responsibility.
And you've been a part of the group, Sergeant Major, maybe from the beginning?
Yeah, so I got here in 2005. I've never left, so about 20 straight years.
How have you seen it evolve?
I'd say we've gotten a little younger.
Yeah.
We've definitely got younger, but I think we're more capable right now than we've ever been. We have the right people. We're training on the right things. There's less ambiguity in what we want you to do, more specific focus on this, and that top thing is lethality and being ready.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because your boss, General Ferguson, great fan and guest of the show, has been on numerous times, has talked about his priorities, and it's lethality, adaptability, and creativity. When you look at your priorities and your vision for the group, what are the top priorities?
So the top priorities is to ensure that whatever battalion is going out the door is trained and ready to execute their mission. Okay. And so they've got a series of pre-mission training events that they have to do leading up to their deployment that they've got to successfully accomplish before they walk out the door. The second thing, or the second priority that we have, is ensuring that our detachments and our people have mastered what we call foundational skills. And those foundational skills are rooted in lethality. So General Ferguson talks about it a lot. It's something that CSM and I have been all in on since we have been in the seat, over the last 20 or so months. A lot of people talk being really good at the basics. What we've done here is define, but it's always driven me nuts. Like, what does that mean? And what we've done is define what those basics are. And the basics, what we call foundational skills, are absolutely rooted in lethality. Because at the end of the day, if you look back at our history and what we've done and what we think we're going to do in the future, it's all about lethality. There's some other missions that SF does, but one of the things we can't assume risk on is not being good at lethality. And then the third priority that we've got is modernizing at scale. And I know we'll get into it a little bit later, but we have to keep pace with our modernization efforts. We have a colloquial way of saying what we do in terms of mission. We have our assigned mission and we have our design mission. Our assigned mission keeps us busy, always deployed, always doing something forward. But we also have this design mission aspect of the unit where we have to continue to modernize to keep pace. We have to have a foot in both worlds because our assigned mission isn't going away anytime soon, and we've got to keep pace. So those are probably my top three priorities.
A big evolution has occurred over the last couple of years since the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Our elected leaders have put a final chapter on what we called the global war on terror. You talked about having a foot in both worlds. Well, those worlds are the worlds of terrorism, and they're the worlds of what we're calling large-scale combat operations, or LSCO, as we've talked about on previous episodes. The reality is, and what you're saying is, that both of these worlds exist.
100%.
And we may have changed the terms, but the reality is we've got to be prepared for those. And so going into that second warfighting function, we talk about movement and maneuver. At the end of the day, it's our ability to close with and destroy the enemy, the lethality that you're talking about. Our special forces groups are regionally aligned.
Yeah.
The Middle East is 5th Group's regional alignment. Talk for a second about, more broadly, why is regional alignment important for special forces? And then we're going to get into the Middle East.
Yeah, sure. So regional alignment is important for a couple of reasons. One, if a unit's regionally aligned, they understand that region's culture, they understand the dynamics, they understand the nuances that are involved in that region. You also get something that we call repeat offenders, which is somebody seeing a problem set not for the first time, and then going away and doing something else, but they're seeing that problem set over and over and over again, which builds, I would say, a cognitive muscle memory in terms of what they're seeing out in the region. And then they know the players. They're developing relationships. This is a relationship business, specifically special forces. CSM, he's got, I don't want to steal any thunder that you may have on this, but he mentioned he's been in the group for 20 years. That's 20 years of relationships with partners within the Middle East that he can call up or they can call him. And that is something that is unique and special, and it pays dividends.
Well, Sergeant Major, I want to ask you about the concept of by, with, and through, because when we fight as special forces, that's really what we're talking about. Identifying a partner force, aligning with them, and then implementing this term by, with, and through. So what does it mean, and how does that complement the regional alignment?
So I'd say by, with, and through. I mean, the words kind of speak for itself in that, but that's where you gain your rapport. When you talk about long-term relationships with a partner force, when you're working by them, with them, and through them, that's where rapport's built. There's tons of vignettes for this, but I'll use the Iraqi counterterrorism force as an example.
I remember them well.
Yeah. So I grew up in the SIF here in 5th Group, and I worked extensively with the ICTF. And those were our brothers, and we trained together, we bled together, and those are long-term relationships that we leveraged, even going back into Iraq in 2014. If I didn't have those specific relationships with some specific people, it would have been a lot harder to, you would have been starting at the ground zero again. So working by, with, and through a partner is where you gain your rapport and truly build not only a partnership, but a friendship with those individuals.
What about our allies? Because we talk a lot about our partners, but there's also our allied nations, our NATO allies, and those who fight alongside us, who come from generally the same backgrounds as us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have allies here embedded within 5th Group that work at our advanced skills company, and they take those lessons learned back to their organization, and they also bring us lessons learned as well.
Yeah, I think they've been an important part. I think we've seen every conflict. Somebody told me, I forget who, as they said, America never fights alone.
Never do. You can go back to the founding of this nation, and we have always fought with a partner every single time. I cannot think of a time we've gone into a conflict unilaterally. Always with somebody else. And if you're a special forces guy, that's important. Because we are a force multiplication organization. And so whether you're talking NATO partners or indigenous partners, it all adds up to a force multiplying effect.
Let's talk about the Middle East.
Yeah, let's talk about the Middle East.
Sergeant Major's laughing over there. He's not laughing because it's an easy place to operate. It's certainly a difficult place to operate. I think we've seen over time it's one of the more complex areas that we tackle, not only as an army, as a military, but even in our, if you look at the spectrum of DIME, diplomatic, information, military, and economic powers that our government leverages to exert influence. General Votel and I, former CENTCOM, JSOC, and SOCOM commander, had an in-depth discussion about the complexities that we face in the Middle East and the varying natures of our relationships with partners, with allies, with adversaries.
Yeah.
Well, you're responsible for our special operations capability within the region. How do you assess the Middle East?
So
I could 10 hours, not just that.
So, I actually get this question a lot, and I would say since October 7th, 2023, and especially since December of 2024, I would say it is probably, I do not have a crystal ball. You used to be able to kind of read the tea leaves and kind of see where things were trending in the Middle East a little bit. I don't think there's a crystal ball available that could tell you what direction the Middle East is going. I've never seen so much change or volatility in the region than probably right now. You have a new Syrian government that's in place. Nobody saw that happening. ISIS hasn't gone away. They had their physical caliphate. A lot of pressure was applied. They've gone to safe havens out into the hinterlands in Syria, but given time, it is very feasible. You can see that problem, the ISIS problem, come up again.
Fifth group's been involved, certainly in the region since inception. But if we look at the most tactical level deployment of forces, they carried a lot of the weight in Afghanistan. And a lot of other groups, third group specifically, carried, and suffered great loss there.
First, yeah.
And everybody contributed to that mission for decades. But, it was the fifth group teams who, along with the 160th, who we'll be with tomorrow right down the road here, were there from start to finish. Sergeant Major, when you look at the global war on terror and you think about the impact the group had on the mission in Afghanistan, what comes to your mind?
If I were to sum it up in one word, it'd be proud. Like when you look back in the history of fifth group, it's hard not to be proud, which brings your level of game up, because being the next generation from those guys, you feel like you owe it to them to ensure that you're upholding those standards. So yeah, I'm just proud to be here. I'm proud to be part of this organization and to have the history that we have.
I'm going to jump in there for a second because you see, that's a great way to characterize it. And there's little reminders around this group to remind us of that, of our role in the early days. Like right over there, you got 2 I-beams. Those are from the World Trade Center, in the shape of a V, obviously for fifth group, Roman numerals. But you see little things like that all across this group, and it goes back to what I mentioned at the top of the show, which is it is events like that are bred into are part of the culture and the DNA of the organization. And what the CSM said in terms of not wanting to disappoint or let down the guys that came before us, that's a huge component to the success and the culture of this organization.
I think you see that too across the whole regiment when you talk to people who come from fifth group. They are proud of that series, and it really
some might call it a cult, Frank, for fans.
Well, coming from 10th group, we spent a lot of time rotating back and forth.
Yeah.
I mean, our days in Iraq, were, we would rotate back and forth with fifth group. And so we were able to see a lot of that. But now we're looking at what's next.
What is next?
Where do we go from here in this concept of this large scale combat operations comes into effect, this term LSCO. I think it has, people are polarized in how they interpret this term. And I've had people sit across from me and say, oh yeah, I love it. And I'm going to talk about it. And others say, I hate that term. And here's how we define it. But how do you define LSCO, large scale combat operations?
So I would say it's two. I've been thinking about this over the weekend because I'm in the camp of, I'm not a fan of that term. I'd rather just call it war or combat. I would say large scale combat operations. I would say it's two nation states, nation state on a size, scale, and depth that you haven't seen before. Like none of us have seen it. It is large formations. It's not non-state actors going at it, or non-state actors and state actors. It is two state actors or multiple state actors going at it. But I think what defines it or characterizes it is scope, scale, and depth. When you think about how much sustainment is required or would be required to go into something like large-scale combat operations, it blows your mind. When you think about what the CCIR level is for, let's just say, a corps commander or a JTF commander, we just did a warfighter this past summer, and what was interesting was what the CCIR level was for deaths or for a lost formation for that corps commander. And I think the minimum CCIR was like a battalion. Like, if it's less than a brigade, don't wake me up.
Of loss.
You're like, okay, this is a new ball game.
Yeah.
And so that warfighter, which is, for those that don't know, it's just a giant simulation, but it was great for understanding what that size, scope, and depth really equates to in a large-scale combat operation. Something we just hadn't really appreciated before, because when you compare it to the GWOT or CT operations, those are acute engagements, probably non-contiguous battle areas. And you don't have to worry so much about things like sustainment, protection, yeah, but a little bit, but not on the size or scale that you would for large-scale combat operations. You do large-scale combat operations, you're talking flots, that you're trying to control terrain or advanced terrain. It's just a different ballgame entirely.
Yeah, I think you just have to find those things that overlap as well. I don't think you can isolate what we've been doing in one bin and then LSCO in another bin. I think you have to figure out where things overlap. You need to be lethal in both. There's a lot of overlap, but I think we're bridging some of these gaps with the combat training centers. We are way more involved with the CTCs than we have been in the past, and we're getting some good reps there. But I do think you have to acknowledge that a lot of our experiences are relevant in both, and we need to continue to push forward and figure out those holes that we need to uncover or cover up.
I think the fight in Syria with this group was a pretty good example of lessons that apply to both, where this group was pushing a flot, taking back terrain from ISIS. Was it large-scale combat operations by the definition? No, but there's definitely some overlap and some similarities. And like we were talking about before we came on the show, the ability to pull on those lessons learned and put it back into the group, into our training, that's a continuous cycle that we strive to achieve.
Well, when we think about that term, you think about nation state on nation state, peer on peer, near peer on near peer. You can go back to a few comments that have been made over the last year. The job of SOF is to keep the word near in front of peer as long as possible. But also, you think about the conventional forces, integration with conventional forces. We think about long-range fires out of the Army,
Oh,
which we're seeing in Ukraine. We think about long-range precision bombing out of the Air Force. You think about the capability that comes off of our carrier strike groups out in the Navy. Well, SOF now has to play a role, and
Yep.
SOF has to figure out what's our role in the LSCO fight. So what is SOF's role in that LSCO fight?
So there's a couple things we can do. One of the things we can do is provide that deep sensing capability that the rest of the joint force doesn't have, or they may have it, but they need us. What it looks a lot like, honestly, is what, at least there's a little bit of overlap, a function that Core LRS used to provide. I get a lot of heat sometimes because old timers will say, "Oh, we don't want to get into we're not Core LRS. We don't want to do Core LRS stuff." Like, okay, time out. If not us, who? All right. Last time I checked, Special Reconnaissance, that is a mission for SF. And oh, by the way, we're not Core LRS. What we do is we do things with a partner, and we go where nobody else can go. And if the big one kicks off, we will be what the nation needs us to be. So we will go forward. We will conduct deep sensing. We will conduct SR. That is a function. Let's not forget what we are as a core in terms of the SF regiment. We are a combat maneuver force. We just do it with a partner. So the things that we stress on here at the group, we talk foundational skills, lethality. In this group, if you want to deploy, you got to conduct a maneuver live fire at night with a partner force. That applies in our current assigned mission. And then when you think about what you would do, in the future fight in LSCO, I can see a LSCO fight where we're taking a partner force and being that combat multiplier and doing some kind of maneuver warfare or combined arms maneuver warfare against a near peer, 100%. So deep sensing, reconnaissance, providing the sensor to shooter required for long range fires for that joint force, combat arms maneuver warfare. Yeah, I think there's a role. Now, we're not a panacea. We know our role. We have limitations, but I think it comes down to what gaps can we fill for that joint force, because they can't do everything. And I'll also say, as I was thinking about this before we came on the show, what's unique about us is our agility. We're pretty agile. We don't come with a large sustainment tail. We don't have a lot of protection assets. But if you were to watch what I forgot, honestly, or did not have the right appreciation for, was how much effort it takes a brigade or higher to uncoil and conduct an attack, and what it entails. Like, there's a lot of moving pieces that those guys have to go through. A little bit easier for SF folks or SF units of action. So I think those are some of the things or some of the functions that we can provide in that future fight.
Yeah, I think the key to us, though, is being flexible. We might not know what we're going to do yet. We might not have figured it out. I don't know. I mean, I know Colonel Szody threw out some things that we can do, but I think there's some other options that are probably on the table that we're going to discover in CTCs. And it's education at all echelon of what we can do and how we should be used.
I think too, you incorporate the multi-domain fight.
Yeah.
And we've heard senior leadership, specifically General Braga, the USASOC commander, talk about the SOF-Space-Cyber Triad. And how are we now in this LSCO fight incorporating things like the cyber warfare, the space fight? Where does that tie into the SOF mission?
So that comes down to what we call our access and placement. You always hear about where SOF is located globally at any given time, the numbers and the stats, however many countries, number of people. But, what he's really talking about when he talks about the triad is having soft personnel in a place that only they can be, providing the access for unique space and cyber capabilities. Okay. What he's not talking about is turning, an 18 series or having an 18 series guy, an SF guy conduct, or turning them into a space or cyber operator. That's
Right.
not the intent. Although there are some folks out there with those capabilities. It's providing the access and placement to leverage a space or cyber capability at a time of our choosing that ultimately supports the joint force. So that's what he's really getting at. It's our access and placement forward the line of troops, that's unique, that allows the triad to be a thing.
So my experience, like all of us here, was so much of that was consumed with the global war on terror, tactical decisions in a bottom-up, intel-driven environment,
Yeah.
meaning that we as ODA commanders, as infantry platoon leaders, as the unit of action on the ground embedded with the ISOF, were out there developing target packets, identifying the folks, the bad guys, we had to go after, planning the operation, and then going out there and executing. Decisions, by and large, were made by team sergeants, team leaders.
Yeah.
In split teams, you had junior NCOs in charge of formations and making tactical level decisions. How does that change in large scale combat operations?
So when you were doing this, how far out were you thinking?
Like tomorrow.
Yeah, right.
Today.
So in LSCO, you got to be thinking at least 96 hours out. You've got to be putting out guidance to detachments for them to operate off of for about 96 hours. Okay. It is a much more top-down driven event than what we experienced growing up. Okay. You characterized it great. The GWOP and CT was really, a 24-hour targeting cycle, that was bottom-up driven. When you talk LSCO, you've got a JTF commander, a 3 or a 4-star. He's the guy in charge. It's his plan that core or JTF is working to achieve. And so the actions that we take have to be in line. They call it unity of effort. Have to be aligned with what the overall plan is. There really isn't a whole lot of time for choose your own adventure, go do what you want, Fran Racioppi, like go pick whatever targets you want to hit. Like you may go out and execute, go after the right targets, but are they being done at the right time? And that's where it's a much different ball game. You got to think about all the different moving pieces. How many when you think about how many divisions just on the Army side of the house, how many divisions would be involved or corps would be involved? Uh, there is a synchronization of effort and a unity of effort that has to be achieved for this stuff to be successful.
I think there's commanders as well at echelon have to be comfortable with not knowing everything.
Yeah.
I mean, we're still sending out daily sit reps. So there is a learning curve not only on the tactical side of things, but also at commanders at echelon understanding you might not get the picture painted like you're used to getting the picture painted, but you're still going to have to make hard decisions. So that there's I think a ton of learning in that as well. And I think I've thrown out CTCs quite a bit, but I think the CTCs shake out some of that to get commanders comfortable with making decisions without knowing all of the information.
What's the probability? And I'll frame that in terms of we've seen our congressional leaders, we've seen our military leaders, we've seen our national intelligence leaders stand up and kind of beat the drum saying we are closer to the next terrorist style attack
Yeah.
than we are away from the last one really being not the 9/11 attacks. And yet at the same time, we're going to the CTCs. We're talking about large scale, really war, not combat, war against a near peer or peer adversary. But what's the higher likelihood?
That's a good question. I don't know what the higher likelihood is, but here's what I do know. I would rather train for my worst day than anything else. Like if I can train for my worst day, this goes back to the lethality piece. And I've seen commanders kind of grapple with not knowing all the details of what mission they're going to deploy to. And they're like, oh, what do I train on? And what do I assume risk? No, train for the hardest day. And if I train for a near peer fight, which is very much lethality focused, I'm pretty sure I'll be okay doing anything else. That's my take.
Yeah, I don't know what the likelihood is, but the likelihood of a 5th Special Forces Group soldier engaging with an enemy in the Middle East is highly likely. So we're going to continue to be lethal. And I don't know the likelihood of LSCO, but I do know it's highly likely that a member of 5th Special Forces Group will engage in combat.
We had
Like today.
we
Soon.
14 Purple Hearts were awarded to individuals this past year. We're going to have 2 receive the Silver Star here pretty soon. That it is a reality that guys deal with in this group. When guys show up to this group, you walk into the foyer and you can tell it's a new guy because he looks lost. And he's got his paper. He's like, he's checking in. He's like, oh, I'm here. I'm signing. I'm like, everyone's like, hey, you signing in? Yeah. You knew? Yeah. Okay. First question, was 5th group your first choice? Yes, it was. Well, why'd you choose 5th group? I figured it gave me the best chance to go to combat. I'm like, you are absolutely correct. Like the Middle East it's the Wild West. You never know what's going to happen, and people don't have a problem fighting there. And that's just the world that we live in. So we have to train for that reality.
I can't guarantee a lot of things
Yeah.
about your experience in Special Forces. There's a couple things I can guarantee here is you're going to be held accountable.
Yeah.
And you're going to deploy.
Yeah.
Those are my 2 guarantees.
Yep.
And I'm glad he brought up training.
Yeah.
Because Sergeant Major, I got to ask you, I heard that there's a couple of words here that get right down to the core. One of them standards and one of them is fundamentals. How do you define standards and fundamentals? What do they mean to you?
Well, I do want to highlight one thing. Me and the Colonel are training right now because it is cold out here.
It's a little
It is cold.
And he asked, should we wear some snivel? And I said, no, we're not
I
doing it.
encouraged you to,
Yeah.
by the way.
We're not doing it. I'm like, I'm going to be on film wearing snivel.
Yeah. This is the mark of a good Sergeant Major, and don't take this don't cut this out.
Standards and fundamentals.
Standards and fundamentals.
So I think when you really break it down, like why did somebody join Special Forces? And I ask people this a lot, and it's usually the caliber of people in the standards and those types of things. So those are things we're not going to give up. And I know there's a lot of jokes about 5th Special Forces Group and the standards, and you'll still see some ridiculous mustaches rolling around here, but those combat focused standards we do not get away from, and we define them. Like, hey, with your M4, we're lethal day or night, 600 meters and in, and that's our standard. How do I know that? Because I hold you accountable on it. I have my tactical skills competition. So there's levels of accountability throughout this group that ensures that we hold a standard. And then you talked fundamentals. I know the Colonel mentioned maneuver, live, fire, range at night with a partner. That's just shoot, move, communicate. It's just being more specific. that ensures you have fire control measures, both verbal and nonverbal. Those are those. I don't want to say they're not check the block things. If that's part of your validation process, then that's riddled within your training calendar. So there's those types of things we put in place, and we talked about this before or inside a little bit ago. Was there's got to be a baseline in how everybody grows up. And I relate it to kids with, reading, writing, and math. No matter where you go to school, you're going to learn those things. Well, if you come to Fifth Special Forces Group, what's our equivalent of that? And that's maneuvering at night, shooting live rounds, fire control measures, owning 600 meters and in, MOS cross train, be able to save your buddy. And there's gates that you have to go through to ensure that you can do that.
I'm going to jump in because there's a good story on this one. So I mentioned the 2 silver stars we're going to get, or our guys are going to get here coming up. Talking with the guys that were wounded in that engagement afterwards, we asked them, "Hey, what's your feedback?" They were at Walter Reed, and their response was great. It was truly great. They said, it was like we were in this really weird jacked up scenario where they're like, "Hey, 18 Delta, you're down. 18 Bravo, you're now the Delta. Return fire and move an obscene distance over hilly terrain to a pickup site." They're like, it was just like training. And I think that's probably the best, if you're a leader, that's probably the best compliment, not even compliment, that's the best feedback you can get, right? To where your guys were in a pretty bad spot. But what got them through it was hard training that was, that didn't compromise on foundational skills.
I think a big part of hard training, though, is the accountability. The leader accountability. And we talk about leader engagement, and what does that mean? It means you're not bringing Gatorades out on Wednesday. I need you to look at the training calendar, and I need you to see what important training is going on throughout the week, and I need you to be out there. We are younger. I think that's
Yeah.
common knowledge at this point. So oftentimes the team sergeant is the master trainer and also the primary trainer. So getting an extra set of eyes out there for old Bravo right rifle, getting the Sergeant Major out there. And what it does is it makes everybody's job a little bit harder, but that's okay. That's why we do it. Those leaders holding people accountable makes us better.
I think when we look at the training too, we can tie that training piece into that warfighting function of protection, because we have to be able to be ready for any fight. And as we've talked about the various threats that remain out there, at your level, you talked about training for your worst day.
Yeah.
How are you consistently reinforcing to the team sergeant, who might be younger, who may have a certain set of experiences, but not others, that there's a variety of complex challenges that you may be asked to respond to at any given day, and your job is to be a subject matter expert ready to do so?
Yeah, I'd say some of the stuff we're asking them to do, the knowledge level lies one level higher than what it used to. That's okay if you acknowledge it and say that's an issue. So that forces engagement, but what you have to have leaders willing to learn. And that's kind of my red line. If you're a leader and you're not willing to learn, you're not willing to embrace feedback, you're not willing to accept other people's experiences to bridge these gaps, because that's what we're trying to do. Is we're trying to bridge gaps, and the best way to do that is leveraging other people's experiences.
Let's talk about the guys.
Yeah.
We look at sustainment being another of the warfighting function. We'll tie it into recruiting, and we'll talk about the unit's ability to
survived not only on the battlefield, but as an organization over a long period of time. Each of you have been around the Army, around Special Forces for a while, but sir, you went to West Point, spent time in Ranger Battalion, served in 1st Group, 10th Group, now 5th Group.
Yeah.
Sergeant Major, we joked you've been here since the dawn of 5th Group. Different experiences, but you come together as a command team. For a second, could you each talk about why even join, number one, the Army in the first place, but then number two, why you're in the Green Beret?
So my family has a history of serving. My dad served in Vietnam. My grandfather and his brother were in World War II. One was in the Pacific. One walked across France. A great grandfather gassed during World War I in Europe. And I think I've got another great grandfather, great grandfather that also served as well. But so I kind of grew up with it. But I, why SF? I would say, I can remember back to when I was in high school, and I had there was a Vietnam era Green Beret that swung by the high school, and he gave a little bit of a pep talk, and what he had to say was one of those like career counselor days, but what he had to say really sucked me in, like the way he carried himself, the way he talked, like based on his personal experiences. I was immediately sucked in. I'm not one of those guys who say, I watched John Wayne's The Green Berets and that's how I got. No, it was that one individual, that NCO that came to my high school that was able to relay his personal stories from Vietnam that really piqued my interest. And from there, I was kind of a history nerd in high school, and I knew I wanted to go into the military. But the more I started scratching the surface on SF, the more I realized that's what I want. The power of 12 individuals to, combat multiply with an indigenous force. That's what I want to be a part of. And so that's what really drew me in. That's why I joined SF.
So I know you mentioned you went to West Point. I was a Coopville High School graduate, class of 97. I don't think you have that in your notes over there.
It's in the All-Star
Yeah.
section over here.
So for me, I came in at 17 years old, and it wasn't because I was I had all these options, and I had zero options. I was at my social peak in high school.
I think you're at your social peak now.
Yeah. So I was in my social peak. Didn't do really well in school. Not a ton of options for me. So really, to get my parents off my back, I was like, hey, I'm going to join the Army. I joked around with them one time. I was like, hey, I'm going to be a garbage man. They get paid well. And they made me take out the garbage all the time. So I switched it up. So it was really kind of like, I'm just going to join the Army. Not a lot of thought put into it. Wasn't from a military family. And I joined the infantry. And then I was kind of one of those, I could run fast, and I would like shine my boots. I was like Dream Private, dog tags, ID card, pen and paper, and could run fast. So, so I was in the infantry for a while. They coaxed me into re-enlisting. They said, hey, what do you want to re-enlist? I was like, I'm going to re-enlist for Ranger School. And they're like, all right, easy deal. So I re-enlisted to go to Ranger School, got done with that. And then I was in the PX at Fort Lewis at the time. And I saw a first group guy, and he had all these badges. I had no idea what they were. And I was like, man, that guy's sweet, and researched it. So yeah, first group's the one that got me to go to selection, went to selection, and then a bunch of us came to fifth group. I got done with the Q course in 2004. Got off to a rough start because I had to teach for a year at small unit tactics. So got here in 2005, and I haven't left for 20 years.
I want to ask you about something that the former Sergeant Major of the Army, Dan Daly, brought up, who I had a chance to talk to him a few weeks ago. And he was actually my first battalion Sergeant Major when I was a platoon leader, and was hugely impactful in my early career. But I had a chance to sit down with him now that he's at AUSA, and we talked about the American dream and how Army recruiting right now, and we'll talk about the fact that SF has not been immune to the Army recruiting challenges over the last couple of years. But there's this idea in America now that you can't pursue the American dream if you don't go to college. And we've put college on this pedestal, and we've forgotten about things like the trades or the Army, and how the Army is a path to be able to do that. But I'm reminded of it here because you talked about you didn't go to West Point, you didn't go to college, and yet you sit here 20 plus years later in command of one of the
did all right.
premier units within our military, who's called upon as a first phone call many times in defense of the nation.
Yeah, so I actually think about this a lot, and I talked about myself when I was 17 years old, and social peak, and I needed something in my life, but I made the smartest decision of my life when I was probably the biggest idiot, and that was to join the Army. I look around on everything I have now and all the opportunities, and as my daughter goes to college using my GI Bill, and all of these things, and how successful not only I've been, but my family has been throughout these years, owning a home, all these things that people, I think, couple with the American dream. Like, I have that, and I'm a Coopville High School graduate, class of 97, towards the bottom of the class.
So the path exists.
The path exists.
Let's talk about recruiting for a second, because I agree with many out there that I think two things can be true. I think that there's a lack of propensity to serve in American culture right now. I think that our generation, those of us who are out and those of us who are still serving, in many ways, could be argued did too good of a job in protecting this nation. We did our job, and that's what was asked of us. But the majority of the nation has forgotten 9/11. They've forgotten.
Oh yeah,
And don't know. And we'll talk tomorrow with
because they weren't born.
they weren't born.
I got people in the formation that weren't born. Before 9/11.
That's crazy.
And it's crazy to us because it's something that's been part of our entire career until you see it and you put yourself in their shoes. You're like, actually, we're just old now.
Yeah.
So it's not that crazy, but there's a contextual dissonance between us old timers and the people that are growing up.
Yeah. But I do think that there's people out there who want to serve.
Yeah.
And there are people out there who will be very good in service. Yeah. And what's required is them to be motivated to serve. And what we've seen over the last couple of years, and we're seeing a pendulum shift now. And if you go back to, the early days of Afghanistan into Iraq, it was the flag, stood tall, the call to service was there, everybody jumped on board. And then we went into an era where we saw a softer side of Army marketing. Hey, come in the Army, we have a job for you. And there's a million MOSs, you can do anything. But at the end of the day, the job of a soldier, the job of a Green Beret is to close with and destroy the enemy.
Yep.
And warfighting is a critical component of that. And that is what we're being asked to do. When you look at those who are coming into the ranks now, what do you see?
So I'll say we are getting the right people. I will speak for my formation, my unit. When we get people coming in from the key course, we are getting the right people. The people that want to serve. They want to be challenged. They're doing it for all the right reasons. What's really cool, and I acknowledge I'm going to be talking mostly about our 18 series folks because that's the core lifeblood of this unit. You get people coming into this formation that were very successful on the outside, um, as part of that mix of folks that come in. You'll get everything from lawyers to rocket scientists, down to very young folks that come in, that enlist at 20 years old, but they're all the right people. And so that's what we're seeing. Yeah, do you get a little bit of a cross section of society? That's the way I like to put it. Yeah, you sure do. But that's okay. And by that I mean, do we still have some discipline issues across the formation? Yeah, you got young kids. Show me a point in time in our Army's history where you didn't have that problem. You're not. But by and large, we are absolutely getting the right folks, especially on the SF side of the house. When they get here, we think about the Q course. That's an MOS producing place. It's an MOS producing school. In other words, they are getting trained in their military occupational specialty. And that's what they are certified in when they leave the Q course. The real training starts when they get here at group. And the sergeant major, this gets into the training side of the house, which is his passion and love language. Mine too, but that is where we take that basic entry level SF individual, and we are really putting the screws to them and training them and making them masters of their craft. But
Yeah, I think, for me, what kept me in, one, it was a camaraderie, but they truly got the most out of me. And I think that's our responsibility, is to get the most out of every soldier that comes into this unit. And when you do that, you get a sense of purpose, which drives into them staying in. The goal is not only getting them into the Army, but retaining them within the Army. And we talked about, my experiences. I didn't have a ton of options. Some of these guys have a lot of options. And, we have former NFL players that are across the street right now.
yeah,
So they have a ton of options that I didn't have. So when it comes to staying in, they look at, do I get out or do I stay in? I'd say if you get the most out of them and you give them exactly what they signed up for, then your ability to retain them is much higher. And I think you get that at 5th Special Forces Group.
well, I'm going to steal a line from you, which is, and you tell me if I'm screwing this up.
I will.
Okay. He's not going to be the reason that.
Yeah, he's screwing it up.
Yeah, I'm screwing it up. So you do it.
I tell people, like, there's so many microcultures within this organization. And what kept me in was my teammates. It wasn't the group CSM. He had zero to do with it. But so I'm probably not going to be the reason why somebody stays in. But my goal is not to be the reason why they get out. And I think sometimes people get into certain positions and they become the reason why somebody gets out, and they didn't have to.
See, I totally botched that. But
Yeah.
the other thing is that what's unique about, the retention piece, or what's important to the retention piece, is the empowerment of your people. You got to, I think this is what CSM was getting at, but you've got to be able to empower everybody in your formation to do what they need to do within the limits of their control. And I think that's kind of bred into the SF culture. But empowerment, giving them, it leads to individuals finding their purpose or
I love
going after
empowering
their
people
Yeah.
because now they own it.
Yeah.
Now I get to hold them accountable. And empowering, people love it, or they love saying it until they're empowered. And then they're
So
like,
they
oh
own it.
man, I own that now.
And when you own it, it's another ball game.
Well, there's no hiding.
There's no hiding.
There's no hiding at that point. But your results are greater.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, we talked about the role of our partners and allies and by, with, and through. And really, at the end of the day, I mean, one of the reasons we partner by, with, and through is because America can't solve everyone's problem across the globe at every given time.
Nope.
So we have to go out there. We have to develop capability. We saw this in Africa.
Yeah.
When you sent me to every country in East Africa to go find units who were capable of doing that.
Yeah.
Some with success, others with not.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what it's about, is finding leaders who are willing to solve their own challenges. We'll give them the tools, we'll give them the training, and then they got to get out there and do it for themselves.
Yeah.
When we're not there.
100%.
All right, let's talk about fires, but also tie that into equipment. Technology is front and center.
Yeah.
Modern warfare. We're seeing it across the world right now. Drones, automation, sensors. Every SOF leader we've talked to has brought it up. General Brago was actually quoted this morning by the Association of the United States Army talking about the advancement of technology, saying that the side that innovates through this ecosystem the fastest will win.
Yeah.
We have seen in every discussion our senior leaders talking about the retooling of the MTO and changing and asking the question, is a 12-man ODA in its current construct the future? Does it need to be bigger? Do we need more skills? Are we going to introduce a robotics or a UAS capability into the tactical element? How is 5th Group implementing things like unmanned aerial vehicles, robotics, advanced technology at the ODA and group level?
Okay, so I'll touch on the procurement piece first. So there's a difference between procurement and innovation at our level. On the procurement side of the house, you're well aware of what kind of a mess that is, right? When we talk counter UAS systems, that is a procurement issue that the 5th Special Forces Group, that me as a commander, I cannot solve. I have to rely on industry to help me solve that problem. And as you know, because the procurement problem is so bureaucratic, it takes years for solutions to get into the hands of our people. And that's the way it's been. And I know folks are trying to figure out a more streamlined process, but we don't solve the procurement problem here at 5th Group. What we do solve for problems here at Group are issues that we can control. So training and education. You mentioned drones. Here's the deal with drones and small UAS systems and uncrewed systems. You're not going to go to combat again without those capabilities, nor will you see those capabilities or not see those capabilities used against you. Yeah, they were used against this group in Syria during the ISIS fight. So it's not a novel concept. It's been used before. What we're doing here at 5th Group, though, is, and we just did our first iteration, training at iteration, is training SUAS, small UAS operators so that we can proliferate trained and educated folks across the formation. What we're not doing is we're going out and chasing the latest Group 1 or Group 2 drone. If you look at the lessons learned from Ukraine, the TTPs and the tech evolves on like a 3 to 6 month cycles. So you're not going to be able to chase technology. It's not feasible. What you can do is train a baseline across your formation. If you can fly a small UAS system and do it well, you should be able to change out the system itself when those, evolutions in tech change and still be proficient, right? It's like driving a stick and then an automatic. So our focus um, is getting folks trained and educated on the systems themselves, being able to fly, build, pilot. That's a win for us. And we've done some things here at Group that have enabled us to do it at a faster pace. So like we have, we've worked out arrangements with the FAA and Post so that we can walk out, right behind this building right here or behind a team room and fly drones without pre-approved clearances, which sounds crazy, I know, but those things do fly. And we are on an Army installation where there's helicopters and aircraft, but we figured it out. And so what we're trying to do is break down barriers for training and education on a capability that we're not going to combat with or going to combat without.
Yeah, I think it comes down like what's our role at the group, and all that. And you can give out training guidance and things like that, but it comes down to expectation and opportunity. And those things have to interlock. So where we put a ton of focus is providing that opportunity, because the expectation at all echelons are there that we know how to use this stuff and we're training on it. But oftentimes the opportunity isn't there because of procurement or whatever that barrier is, and we're there to knock down those barriers to ensure they have the opportunity.
Do you have what you need?
The bigger if you get a bigger rucksack, you're going to put more stuff into it. Our secret sauce here at Group is our people. That's really our superpower. We keep getting the right people, we're going to be okay. I have no doubt. You get the right people, you give them the right training, you develop the right leaders, you're going to be all right. You could always want, the next cool piece of kit, next bit of tech. But I think, and I honestly mean this, as long as we're getting the right people, we're going to be okay. I could always use more money, right? I could always use more time. And I know General Ferguson and his team are working to get us a little more time, because when you're always deploying, your limiting factor is the amount of time you have to train, so you can maintain readiness. But, I would say people and time. Those are the two things that you got to have to be successful.
Yeah, I think we do, and I say that because General Ferguson's one of those leaders like you want to work for and you don't want to let down. And I think we have what we have, and we're gonna do our best with what we got. And if there's opportunities to get more, he's gonna get it for us.
Here's another thing. Like, I will tell you that we've talked about the experience gap. What I'll tell you is, there is an experience gap compared to when we were on teams, 20 years ago. But I am routinely amazed by the quality of people that are in the formation and the quality of the teams. Take the experience gap, move it to the side. I hear some of these detachment commanders talking now, and the company commanders, and I am blown away with how proficient they are. And I'm usually left thinking, man, this guy is actually, I wish I was that good when I was in his shoes. So I know it's a little bit of a dichotomy to say, the experience gap is an issue, but we have really quality people, but it's a fact. So I am really happy with what we have in the formation.
Yeah, we have great people. It's our responsibility to get the most out of them. We have great leaders, and I think we're in a good spot.
We owe them opportunities and resources. That's our job.
So the last warfighting function is intelligence.
Mm.
And we can think about lessons learned. You can think about it at an organizational level. You can think about it over your career. And as you know, we like to close these discussions where we talk about our own habits,
Yeah.
our own fundamentals, our own lessons learned throughout our career. I've always framed them as the Jedburghs had to do three things. Those were their fundamentals. They could be yours. You can name them. I'm going to ask you that in a second. But they had to be able to shoot, move, and communicate. If they did those three things with precision, they could fight the Germans, arm the French resistance, solve complex challenges. So the question for you both is, as you look at your career, you look at the things that you've done through all echelons of service, what are the three things that you each do as your daily foundational habits to set the conditions for success?
Well, Fran, I'm going to tell you that from now on, one thing that I'm going to do as a personal habit is bring snivel gear anywhere I go, because it is not war.
Lesson learned.
It's really the wind. It's the wind that's coming.
But I'm going to flip that question on you. So I could talk about sleep, PT, eating right. Here are three things that I would ask my people to do. Okay. I would hope that my people are training like they would fight in the real world. And we've talked a lot about that, over the last however many minutes. I would hope that my people are developing their subordinates and instilling a culture of accountability. And then the third thing I would hope my people are doing is I would hope that they are finding some semblance of balance in their life. And balance doesn't look the same for everybody. Balance for me looks much different than the single detachment commander who lives in Nashville. Different level of balance. I got a couple kids, a wife, group commander. The balance is inherently personal, and it's not 9 to 5. It doesn't mean 9 to 5. It means figuring out, based on your unique set of requirements, what balance really looks like. So those would be the three things that I hope my people are doing.
So 3 things that I try to do every day. I start out early, knock out PT early. When I'm at work, I try to engage with as many soldiers as I can. I think that's the best part of my job. That's where I find the problems. There's no better person to find a problem from an E4, E3. They're just so fun to talk to the soldiers and get their input. So I try to engage with soldiers as much as I can while I'm at work. And then say the final thing, and the boss touched on it a little bit, is the balance. But I try not to give my family the leftovers. Because when you do these jobs, you're in 110%. And oftentimes when you get home, you have about 10% left. And might need to crank an energy drink or something, but you gotta fill your role at the house and try not to just give them the leftovers.
Yeah, that's good advice.
Train like you fight, develop subordinates and accountability, find the balance defined for yourself, get out PT early, engage with as many as possible, and don't give the family leftovers. Can I add one more for you?
Yeah.
CSM, because we talked about it earlier, and I think it's important to put into this conversation. You told me that we have a responsibility to be, I'd say, real with ourselves about where we think we are, where we are, and where we want to be. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so really comes down to your brand and reality. And it's easy to get lost in the brand. I think this Special Forces group has a great brand, but is that in line with reality? And the goal is always to outpace your brand. What you want to hear, man, I knew they could do that, but I had no idea they could do that. And that is the goal. So, if you put it at kind of echelons, and CSM Gitlin's really good at articulating this. It's where you say you are, where you think you are, and where you really are. And we'll hold you accountable and figure out the reality of that. And as long as you have the willingness to get better and learn, we'll work it out. But at the end of the day, we're not going to live off of a brand here. We're going to deal with reality. We're going to embrace being Green Berets, working by, with, and through a partner force. We're going to shoot live rounds at night. We're going to be lethal. There will be more firefights for 5th Special Forces Group soldiers in the Middle East. We will be ready for those. And we're going to train our asses off.
I can't sum it up better than that. So I appreciate your time.
No, thanks.
Down here.
Thanks
Been
for
an
coming
honor.
out, man.
So now we're going to get inside and get warmed up for it.
Yeah.
So good.
Dude, I appreciate you, man.
American Jedburghs went on to form the foundation of the United States Special Forces and the Special Activities Directorate of the Central Intelligence Agency. Thanks for listening to the Jedburgh Podcast, an official program of the Green Beret Foundation. I'm your creator and host, Fran Racioppi. Join us next week for a new episode on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on YouTube for full episodes, highlights, and other long and short form content. If you like what you heard, give us a like and leave a review. Follow the Jedburgh Podcast and the Green Beret Foundation on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, X, or Threads. Send your comments and inquiries to fran@jedburghpodcast.com. As former members of Special Operations Forces, the Jedburgh Media Channel and the Green Beret Foundation remain committed to supporting all generations of U.S. Army Special Forces and their families. Thanks for joining us on this episode. How you prepare today determines success tomorrow.